All right, so I've got some handouts here that kind of talk about this question. So, like a lot of the questions, the answer to the question is really not the answer to the question. What's your greatest weakness is they don't, you know, a lot of times people think, it's like, that's the stupidest question in the world. It's like, why am I going to tell you a reason not to hire me, right? I mean, that's the first time I heard that question is like, why in the world would I want to answer that, right? It just seemed like a stupid question to me. But once I found out what the answer was, it made more sense. And so here's what the answer to the question is. They want you to say that you've done some sort of self-assessment, that you've identified a weakness, that you've come up with a way to mitigate the weakness, and what the results of that mitigation are. Okay? So that's why I've got listed here the 4 main parts of that question, okay, for a correct answer. Excuse me. Now I also listed 5 and 6, which are optional, which are, you know, have you reassessed, right? So you come up with a mitigation, what the results were, and you know maybe you know you've done something else to reassess your progress on that, okay, or whatever. You can certainly talk about that. The other part is, you know, sometimes some people like to end the questions maybe like on a humorous note, but if you do that, make sure it's topical and that it would apply to everybody and they understand. Like, let's say that the Tennessee Titans made it to the Super Bowl. We're from Tennessee. You're interviewing. They just, you know, they just lost or something the week before, and you can say, and my other weakness is I got to stop rooting for the Titans in the Super Bowl, right? Everybody here would get it because we're in Tennessee. It'd give them a little chuckle. So you can do that. Just make sure that you stay away from controversial things, and I'll talk about that here and the things to avoid. So again, that's an optional thing that you could try to include when you talk about your weakness. So things to avoid: saying that you really don't have a weakness. We're going to be like, yeah. I mean, that's just one of those things that kind of the person that's scoring that question will be like, okay, this person doesn't understand the purpose of the question, right? And if they ask this question, that's really what they're wanting to know. You've done a self-assessment, you've identified a weakness, come up with a mitigation, and what the results of that mitigation were, okay? And so if they ask that question, you say, well, I really don't have a weakness. They're like, okay, this guy hasn't really thought about how he is as an employee and how to get better. Because that's really a lot of it also is, you know, does this person look at their performance and identify ways to get better? Okay. That's kind of what they're wanting to know. Don't try to turn your weakness into a strength. I had, one of the first times I answered this question, I said, well, you know, I really don't know I have any weaknesses or strengths. I have different characteristics, and sometimes they're a weakness and sometimes they're a strength. So for instance, you know, sometimes I'm kind of anal retentive. I like to have my list alphabetized or in chronological order, or I like to have things a certain way when I look at them. And sometimes that's a good thing because I produce documents that have hardly any errors in them, but sometimes it's a bad thing if I need to do a lot of things quickly. Then, you know, I can get bogged down in the details and it takes me longer than what it should. You know, maybe I put in a level of effort that was more than what was really required, right? So I tried to turn my weakness into a strength, okay? I thought it was a great answer. I talked to the panel members afterwards and got feedback from them, and they said they thought it was a really great answer too, but it didn't score any points because what they were looking for was, had I done a self-assessment, had I identified a weakness, what was the mitigation I put in place, and what was the results of that mitigation, okay? Danny, you kind of, when you answered that, you kind of talked about how it can also be a strength. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you need to do it in the framework of those 4 main points. Okay, so you can talk about how sometimes your weakness is a strength in certain situations. I don't think that's going to ding you, but as long as you've followed those other 4 main things that they're looking for. Okay, so just kind of be careful about that, because a lot of people do those first 2 things. Well, I don't really know if I have any weaknesses. It's like, okay, Superman, you know, or they try to say, you know, oh, I care too much, you know, those type of things. It's like, my weakness is really a strength.
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to say that.
So the other thing to avoid is using an example that doesn't relate to the skills needed for the position. Okay, so you know, you wouldn't want to use a weakness as, you know, I'm a sucker for a dog. Right? I can't walk past a dog without stopping to pet it. Nobody cares, right? How are you going to relate that to work or anything? So try to pick a weakness that's work related, obviously. Again, some of these seem like they're no-brainers, but again, things to keep in mind, because some people do make those mistakes. Saying that your weakness isn't really a problem. Okay. Again, you don't want to say, well, here's my weakness, but it really doesn't cause any issues. That's not the purpose of the question, is to find out what's wrong with you and whether or not you think it's important. The purpose is, again, are you the type of person that identifies your performance and where you're weak and come up with ways to overcome those weaknesses, right? Using an example that uses prohibited information. So there's certain things that a hiring panel can't ask you, like how old you are, or what religion you are, or if you're married and got kids, and all those sort of things. That doesn't mean you can't volunteer that information, but probably just as a general rule of thumb, try to avoid, you know, those type of, you know, you probably wouldn't say, well, since I'm approaching 55, I really can't get up the stairs very good anymore. You know, just probably try to avoid those examples. And then the last one there, anything that's controversial or polarizing. Don't say your greatest weakness is, I'm very passionate about abortion, or
Politics.
Republicans or Democrats, or gun control, or, you know, something like that, because, you know, odds, if it's polarizing, by definition, that usually means it's kind of like a 50-50 split through the population. Well, you got 3 or 4 people on the other side of the table listening to you. Whatever you pick is probably going to make at least half of them mad, right? And so you just want to avoid things like that in general, right? And then, of course, we talked about the fact that a 30-second, 1-minute answer is probably not appropriate, because, again, they gave you the floor. You get to talk. You need to be selling yourself for as long as you can to take up the entire amount of time for whatever's allotted for the interview. They may tell you have, you know, 45 minutes to do 10 questions. Well, you know, that's you know, 4.5 minutes a question, right? Is that right? So at any rate, make sure that you kind of, when at the beginning of the interview, figure out, okay, well, how long have I got, and make sure that you've practiced some of these questions, and you know, okay, I can answer that question, it takes me 3.5 minutes, but maybe another question, it might take you 6, you know, but on average, you want to be able to fill up that whole time, because the whole time that you're talking, you want to be giving them reasons to hire you, right? Any questions on the notes here or anything?
No.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I did the question, or my greatest weakness last time I answered this was remembering birthdays and anniversaries and stuff like that. So this time I think I'm gonna use your example, or something very similar to your example. Oops, get this set. All right, so what's my greatest weakness, I've done several self-assessments. So one of them I did was a 360 self-assessment where you ask other people to give their opinions of you. And one of my bosses told me that I'm a sucker for a squirrel or a rabbit. And after I got the feedback back, I went and asked him, I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, you know, you can chase the highest priority target that pops up, right? You can be doing one thing and something else pops up and you're off to doing that and you forget about the other thing that you were doing sometimes. And I had to admit that was something I'm kind of guilty of. You know, I'm going down the trail, heading for a destination, and a rabbit runs across, and boom, I'm off after that rabbit. So what I've done to overcome that is I started keeping a list of important things that I not only need to do, but I want to do. And the difference between those is, you know, the things you need to do is you know, like compliance issues or things you have to meet. You know, you have suspenses. But lots of times in the job, there's things that you want to do that would be, you know, improve the workspace or improve a process, but nobody's making you do them. You know, nobody's going to call you if you don't get it done by Thursday. But there's still things that you want to do. And so what I've done to overcome this is I keep a notebook and I write down things of not only things that I need to do, but also things that I want to do. And I put a little box there on the left-hand side of them. And as I accomplish them, I cross off that box so that I know that it's something I've done, and it's a real quick visual aid to give me indication of whether or not the things I've done, but the things that I haven't done stick out very clearly in that list. So I'm able to review that on an occasional basis. Let's say maybe every day or two, I'll pull that list out, and if I've got something that keeps getting you know, missed, okay, I've got all these things done, but I've got this one that's higher in the list and I haven't been able to get to it, I can kind of try to prioritize that and say, hey, I need to knock this out, because otherwise I'm going to fill that page up and it's going to disappear and I won't have accomplished it. So it's a real good way for me to make sure that I'm identifying not only the things that have to be done, but priorities of things that would improve the workplace, and I don't get lost on what the last thing that the boss called up and said, hey, I need this by tomorrow, and then I lose track of the thing that I wanted to do also. So that's just a real good way for me to do it. And since I've been doing it, I've noticed that I've gotten a lot more of the things that I want to do done instead of just the high priority things that are on fire, you know, doing those. So my completion rate on those is just much greater. I'd say I probably am completing probably 60 or 70% of the things I identify as things that I want to do. I'm actually getting those done instead of just all the things that I have to do. So again, it's been very effective for me. I think it's improved my workplace because you know, I'm not just putting out fires. I'm actually doing things to improve the processes of the organization. So I think it's been pretty successful.
Thank you.
So that was 3 minutes and 50 seconds.
Yes.
Again, you know, if you practice these, you can get them about to the time period that you want. But 350 is better than a minute.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So if you notice on my answer, I said I did a self-assessment and I said which one I'd done.
Right.
Okay. Whether it's Myers-Briggs or Four Lenses, or there's lots of different assessments out there that you can do to kind of identify things that you're good at. One of the things, I forgot to bring the book, but I've got a book called Strength Finders in my office that basically basically works under the premise of people spend too much time identifying their weaknesses and trying to work on them versus identifying their strengths and emphasizing their strengths versus trying to improve on their weakness. If you're naturally weak at something, and they use an example of this kid that spent years and years trying to become a professional baseball player, and he was just horrible. right? And he got better than when he started, but he was never going to be a professional baseball player. So why would you want to spend all your time, okay? You know, it'd be like Mike saying, well, I want to fit in a clown car better. Well, Mike's a big guy, right? He's just never going to be the perfect guy to get in a clown car, right, with 50 other guys. So why should he practice that if that's not one of his strengths? You know, pick something that you're good at and concentrate on that. So you can use that tact too on this question by saying, you know, hey, and that's the tact I use with the birthday things. I know I'm weak. I don't put a lot of importance on people's anniversaries or their birthdays or whatever. But I took the Strength Finders test, and I know that one of my skills is very good at organizing things. So what I've done is I've utilized my strength in organizing things to overcome my weakness in you know, having the touchy-feely, hey, it's your birthday or anniversary, and so I set reminders so that I can send out, you know, happy birthday reminders or emails to people. They think that I'm a kind, caring guy when in reality I'm not, because I use my organizational skills to overcome that weakness. So that's a good opportunity to not say, well, my weakness is really a strength, but to say, hey, you asked me about my weakness, but let me tell you about a strength that I have that I use to overcome that weakness. Okay, so that's a good opportunity again to talk about something that you're strong at, because odds are, if you have a weakness, you're going to mitigate it by using a skill that you are good at, right? So that's a perfect opportunity. It fits in. I don't think you're going to get any discredits for that. It should count for you. So so that's a good thing to use. But again, you want to talk about the specific thing that you did. How did you figure out your strength? Not just that, oh, I think you know, this or that. You know, what actual way, what methods did you use to identify your weaknesses? Because again, the purpose of the question is this a person that evaluates their performance and comes up with ways to improve it? Okay, that's the whole purpose of what's your greatest weakness. They don't want to know that you got a sweet tooth. Okay, they don't care. You could use that as an example as long as you fit it in the format of all those other things. I know I got a sweet tooth because you know, because my wife is always my wife did a self-assessment on me and told me that I'm always eating too much chocolate cake, you know. So here's what I do to mitigate it. Here's the results, you know, those things. So again, the weakness probably isn't the important part of this question, right? And there's a lot of questions that are like that. The question is kind of the throwaway part. What they want to know is, in your answer, is the process and stuff. So, and we'll talk about those as we do other interview questions.